We are going to begin by modeling a series of building elements and very low polygon building structures for distant buildings. And it's going to make it a lot easier for creating a city or any sort of distant buildings that we would have, and really rely more on normal maps in order to generate the detail. We'll be able to use each of these sections that we're creating to then kind of piece them together to create a variety of different buildings, and also use the same UV maps and just kind of modify the texture in order to create kind of a larger scale city setup. So I'm just going to add in the cube object to begin with, and I'm using the model mode, default mode, and we can just kind of scale in the sides a little, lift up the object, and really just have a very basic shape to start with. And then I'm going to hit C on the keyboard, which is going to make the object editable. You can also go over to the function pull down, and you can see make editable as the first option. So we can switch over to the polygon mode, and this first roof is going to have flat sections on both the front and the back, and really only angled on two sides. So one quick way to do this is just to extrude. So what we can do is hit M on the keyboard and then T for extrude, and just kind of pull that up. And then switch over to the scale. And if you look under tools, you can see we have move, scale, and rotate set up for E, T, and R. I just have these keyboard shortcuts assigned to thumb wheel on my mouse, so you might see me switching back and forth fairly quickly, but that's where they're normally located. And what we can do is just pull in and kind of stretch this inward, kind of reducing the overall scale. And what I'm going to end up doing is just kind of merging these points together. So what we can do is weld them, and we're going to switch over to the point mode, use the live selection tool, just select these first points, hit M and then Q will weld, and we can click right in the center, hit the space bar to go back to the live selection, and just do the same thing on the other side. And then it'll automatically delete the polygon that was up on top, and this is already a very basic building and can be used. One thing I'm going to do is click on the Fong tag and just set the angle to 22 degrees. Now, because we don't need to have these polygons in front divided, we're going to be creating n-gons, or polygons that are larger than 4 points, because this is a very low res, and we're really just going to be using the image maps, normal maps, to create the detail on the object. And that's going to allow for much quicker processing for the overall setup of the scene. So switch over to the polygon mode, live selection, and we can select these front polygons, and if you go up to structure, select dissolve, and then just do the same thing on the other side. And that way we have a minimal amount of polygons. We don't need to have that area divided, and just keeping it as simple as possible. Now, depending on the distance of this object in the scene, basically the overall size of it and the final output, you need to decide whether or not you need to have a roof overhang. So if we're really, really far away, the roof overhang might not show up or create a big enough impact for it to be useful enough to have those extra polygons using the resources of the scene, taking extra time to calculate certain advanced render options. So you could either keep the current model for a very, very distant object, but what I want to do is just add a little more detail to the roof. And what we can do is select the polygons on top, holding down Shift, using the live selection. So if you select one, hold down Shift, You can select more polygons. If you want to reduce the selection, you can hold down the Control key in order to reduce the selection. So with the 2 polygons selected, what we can choose to do is go to Function and Split. What this is going to do is generate an object with just those polygons selected. So it's now just these 2 polygons. And it is separate from the rest of the object. And I'm going to be just extruding these again, so M and then T. And as I start to extrude this, what you'll see on the top is that those polygons are not joined, and that's controlled by the maximum angle that we see in the attribute. So if we set that above a higher angle than it currently is at, those will join up. And that way we can easily create that roof shape. And then all we need to do is add additional polygons to kind of close off the bottom. And then we can also shift some of these bottom polygons in order to make them create more of an overhang. So if we select just this polygon over here on the side, what we can do is move that out just to create a slight overhang. You can see we've moved that out 5, and we're just going to do the same thing on the other side. And I like doing it this way because we're moving it along the direction of the normal, and whichever way it's facing. If you want to create a little bit of inconsistency or kind of randomness, you can use a different move amount on each side. It can sometimes add to the realism. But I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the top view, and then move over to the rectangular selection tool, turn off only visible elements, and select both the front and back. So you can select one side, hold down Shift, and select the other side. And then we're just going to go back into the perspective view, and I'm just using the middle mouse button to switch. I'm going to move over to the scale, and then we can just stretch that out a little further to create the overhang. So we're stretching it just on the x-axis, which is basically just moving them independently. So now we don't have a polygon on the bottom side. So what I want to do is take our original object, and we can hide it just from the viewport for now. And that way we can really see a little bit better what's going on in the other object. We can go ahead and rename these. And just double-clicking, typing in the names. And we will eventually be joining these objects together, but this is going to be an easy way to separate just for the initial model and also to set up the UV maps. So we're going to go back and select the roof object, and I'm going to go to the live selection and just deselect everything by clicking in a gray area off the object, and then select the Close Polygon Holes tool. And then we can just go ahead and click to see the highlight, which will automatically add in that polygon on the bottom. But we do still need to split it down the center. So we can go to the live selection, select that polygon, and then using the knife tool, set it to line, visible only, and it is restricted to the selection. And we can just split that down the side so that we have 2 polygons. And then we can turn that other object back on so that we can see it in the viewport. Now, another thing I want to do to the wall section is to take the bottom polygon and make sure that we're out of the knife mode. Going to live selection, select that bottom polygon. What I want to do is move this down below where we would typically have the ground plane, and give ourselves a little bit of room to go below the terrain or the ground object. For using a terrain that isn't perfectly level, and the way we're going to end up generating the city is going to be somewhat random, and we might not have complete control over the intersection, or at least it'll take more fine-tuning, which we don't really want to do. So what we can do is generate extra bit of the texture maps to kind of create sort of a base structure for the object and the building. And that way we can extend below the ground plane by a decent amount and not have to worry about any areas where we have a kind of an overhang where we're going to see a sharp edge overlapping the terrain. Now, whether or not you want to leave the bottom polygon of the wall object and the original polygons used to create the roof is really going to depend on some of the features that you end up using for the lighting. I'm going to choose to keep mine as part of the object, but not really worry about them too much for the UV map, because if I delete them, there is the potential for having light leaks when rendering global illumination, ambient occlusion, things like that. So in order to avoid any light leaks, I do want to keep the objects closed off. It's only an extra couple of polygons, so it shouldn't make that big of a difference affecting scene resources. So I'm just going to add in a null object into the scene. Just call this building 1 for now, and then we can move those into the building or into the null, the wall and the roof, and just kind of hide those from the scene for now and start working on another object. So we'll add in another cube, select the cube, switch to the model mode, and this one I'm going to go ahead and stretch out a little bit more, kind of the other direction. Move that up. We'll go ahead and scale it for that overlapping area on the bottom, sort of the base, and then we can hit C on the keyboard to make the object editable, or go to Functions, Make Editable, switch over to Polygon mode, and we have this top polygon we can use for the roof. And for this type of roof, we don't need to disconnect it from the object. What I'm using is the Extrude Inner command, and just moving this so it's not completely overlapping or connected, but just kind of brought in a little. We can switch to the Move tool and just kind of move that up. And now if you did want to have it slope in a little more and create a little bit of a curve, which I'm not going to worry about for the lower resolution buildings, you could use the Bevel tool for that and add some subdivisions. But what I want to do is kind of weld the points together on the end, basically the same as I've done before. We could also use the Stitch tool, and depending on the direction in which you use the tool, you will get different results, but it will require you to reposition that center edge. As we can see in the top view, it's not aligned. So either you can do it that way, or you can just weld the points together. Now, if we were to create a fine point, and I'm going to go ahead and change this Fong over to 22, and let's just go ahead and select the object, copy, paste. Using the model mode, moving it on the x-axis, and now at this point it would actually be difficult to show you that. I'm going to go ahead and just hide this for now, add a new object, and just do this really quickly. So if we were to have a roof that connects to a point in the center, make it editable, select that top polygon. If I use the Extrude Inner again, and then move that polygon up, what we could do is use the Convert selection, and that's located under Selection, Convert Selection. I've got mine just part of the interface, and what you can do is select polygons to points, convert, and then use the Weld tool, so M and then Q, and then just select the middle point, and that'll automatically merge that. And that's kind of an easy way to create this type of a roof. And now if I want to hide this, you can just hold down the control and then click on that little section right there, or if you have something without the tab, you can just click on kind of that little bar that's showing up with the points in it. So that's a pretty easy way to create another building shape. But in this case, I would also want to have an overhang, so we would separate that. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that, go back to our other object, and we can work on this a little bit more. And I want to switch to the polygon mode, and then also use the knife tool again. We can switch this over to a loop if we want to divide all the way around, but depending on the object you have, the loop may not necessarily be straight. So if needed, you can go to the path mode, or sorry, the plane, and then we could do X and Z, and that'll give us the same result. And we could just go ahead and knife this twice, and then go back to the live selection and select the different polygons, or I'm just going to switch to the front view, use the rectangular selection. And because I have the only select visible elements turned off for rectangular selection, it allows me to always have something very easy and quick to switch over to select polygons where I don't want anything else to be, or to have everything selected rather than just visible. So this way I could use one tool for visible polygons or visible elements in general, and then one just to select everything. And that way you don't have to continually switch options on and off. So what I'm going to do is just select all of those polygons in that lower section, and we can just scale this down. So just using the scale tool, so tool and scale, or T on the keyboard, moving that down slightly. Whether or not you want to have that additional cut to add the edge to the roof is really going to depend on the distance and what you need for the detail. But now I'm just going to switch to the move tool, and we can move that upward. If we go over to the edge mode and then select edges, we can choose to do a loop selection. And I have my entire selection pulled down from the top, just condensed into this toolbar. So I can do a loop selection and then just move those up. And this will give us just a little bit of a lip around the bottom of the object. And if we need to stretch in or out more on certain sides, or on one side more than another, we can easily just go back to that rectangular selection, go to polygons. Of course, it's still remembered when we go back to polygons. And then we can just kind of move that in or out, kind of match it up a little bit better, move that into position, and if needed, extend that bottom polygon further down or up to give us that kind of base for the object. So still very low polygon, really just going to be dependent on the normal maps in order to generate the detail. And as I was saying before, if this is way too many polygons, if you're going to have just thousands and thousands of copies of this object, you can remove that additional slice and just have basically that lower slice kind of curved up to the top part. And if you want to avoid the flatter 90-degree angles, you can just kind of scale that edge loop. Overall, this will be more than enough polygons to use for the distant buildings and really pick up with the normal maps. So next what we need to do is set up the UV maps. Basically just the overall shape of the UVs, and then we'll be doing constructing everything in